talk with you about how easy it is to prune your roses. We have three main types of roses that I'd like to discuss. Most people have them in their gardens who collect roses. They are the Floribunda. Floribundas can be described as those which are bushy and low, generally about 3 feet high by 3 feet wide. The next one would be the hybrid tea and grandiflora, 4 feet up to 8 feet sometimes. And then thirdly we have the climbers, which have long flexible canes and need support. Here we have a Floribunda rose which needs cutting back. In my hands I have hedge shears, and I'm going to bring it right down to the size that I ultimately want it to be, because it makes it fast and simple. And once I get it down, then I can see what I have as far as the canes. Alright, this is about the height that I ultimately want the Floribunda rose to be, about 18 inches, maybe 20, 24. Okay, next I'm going to take up my smaller tool, my pruners, and I am going to look at the bush, and I'm going to be looking for dead or broken stems. Over here I have one dead one, which can be cut out. Here's another one, which can be cut off. Alright, the next thing I do is remove all the leaves from the bush. All the leaves. Removing the leaves removes last year's disease. If you look at the leaves while you are removing them, you will find on your rose, as everybody else's rose at this time of year, you'll find little orange spots, you'll find little that would be rust, you'll find little black spots, that would be a disease called black spot, and you'll find perhaps powdery white stuff, and that's powdery mildew. And we don't want to preserve the last year's diseases and bring them forward into this year. So we remove all these leaves. We have all of our leaves removed. We have the dead stems removed, and now what we're looking at is the structure of the rose. We want to have a nicely rounded form, we want it open in the middle, and we want to make sure that we have no branches that are crossing, rubbing against one another, or bending in an odd way. So right here I have two branches that are rubbing hard against one another, and this one's pointing down, so that's the one I'm going to remove. Here's one that is growing oddly too, and I think I'm going to remove this one right back to here. In looking at this stem that I've just cut off, you'll see a little bump here. Now this is important. On all the stems we have the little bumps, and below each bump is a line. I like to think of it as a nose. Let me turn it this way. A nose with a smile underneath. Now, when you're cutting, you want to cut just beyond that nose and smile, and you want to look at the direction that the nose is pointing, because that's going to be the direction of the new growth for this spring. So I cut just above that one. Its growth is pointing out away from the center of the shrub. When we're done completely pruning the Floribunda rose, we want it to look like this. It's open in the center. It has a lot of little stems pointing outward, but not so many that it's congested. It has a nice form. You can see the growth is going to be full and outward and upward. It also has had every leaf is removed, not only from the shrub, but from the ground below it. We've raked it clean. And then the last step with pruning roses is I like to fertilize at this time. Some people wait a little longer, but for me it's easier to do it right now, because, well, then I don't have to come back and do it later. I fertilize after I've raked it clean, and I mulch it, and I spray it. And I spray it with a dormant spray. I use a copper spray, and it keeps any of the spores that are left over from those diseases I mentioned before, the black spot, the powdery mildew, or the rust, have left spores from last year, and the dormant spray will kill those and not allow them to transfer to this year's new leaves. Then we're done. Next we have the hybrid tea rose. It's the next larger one. It has strong vertical canes, and it can grow quite tall, usually anywhere from here up to here, and has the larger flowers, and fewer on each stem as a rule, but much larger. This is the bush that the competition roses come from. So, as before with the Floribunda, the first thing we do is get it down to size. Now the size we want the hybrid tea to be would be a bit taller than the Floribunda. We want it to be around 2 feet. So, again, I take my shears and I bring it down to about 2 feet. So, I'm just bringing it down. I'm not being careful about where I'm cutting. I just want to get it down to size so that I know what I have to work with. Next, what I'm going to do is strip off the old leaves. See how we have rust spores on here? They're pretty ugly. We don't want to keep them for next year's growth at all, so we're going to get rid of them, every single one of them, off of this bush, and as before, from the ground below it. So I'm going to just remove these now. Some people have asked, is it better to cut these off or pull these off? I find it's a lot easier to just pull them off. Be sure to pull them down towards the stem, base of the stem, rather than outward. That way you won't break your stem. Oh, there we have it, a bare rose bush. Now that the stems are all exposed, I can look inside easily and I can see several stems which are dead, and I'm going to need to cut those off first. That's where I will look first and cut that off right at the base. Now I'm going to get out my shears and I'm looking again. We have a dead one here. We're going to cut off this stump. Always when I'm cutting these, I see this is a dead stem. I'm not going to cut it up here. I'm going to cut it right against the main stem, but not into the wood of the stem that I'm keeping, just a little bit away. That way we're protecting the stem we're keeping and getting rid of all of the dead wood. Okay, unlike the Floribunda, which has an abundance of smaller canes, the hybrid tea has mostly strong, larger canes. So when we're pruning it back, we're looking at keeping the good structure. It's rounded, it has strong canes. I'm going to remove the not so strong canes on this one. Over here we have a stem which is pointing down and away. It's long and it's weak, and it looks like it had broken at one time and mended itself. So it's a weaker cane. I'm going to cut that off at its base. Here's a new one that's just starting, that's small. It should come off at this time, just like this one right above it. We just snip all those off. Here's one here, pointing towards the center. Here we have 3 small stems, and together on one branch. I'm not too keen on that, so I look down beyond where they have begun and I see an eye here, or a node, and here we have another node. This node is pointing this way and we have some nice branching here. This node is pointing out into a more open area, so I'm going to cut just beyond that node, knowing that the new growth is going to head off in this direction. Next, I'm going to be looking at things like crossing stems. You see how these two are crossing hard against each other? These two are not only crossing, but they're rubbing against each other. That's something we want to avoid. So now I'm going to get my shears, and again I'm going to cut it down at the base of that stem, but leaving just a bit so that this wood has not been cut into. This stem here is coming from the base. It's an older one. It has put out several branches of weak growth through the center of the shrub. I want to take this one off, and I'm not going to take it off right up here because it's going to continue to put out more small and weak branches. It's also rubbing against this one that we've just preserved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right down to the base again, as close as I can get, and cut that off right at the base. Okay, here we have a very nice hybrid tea rose that has been cut back. It has a nice open center. It has all the small little canes, all the crossing ones, all the dead ones, all taken away and it's nice and open and ready to go for next year. At the base, we've mostly cleaned it away, but we want to make sure we don't have any of those dead leaves left around the base of it. So just as with the Floribunda, we're going to get rid of all of last year's diseased leaves so that we are not transferring disease over from last year. The last step of all, always, is to fertilize, mulch, and spray. So the fertilizing gives it something to grow on. The mulching helps keep the moisture in and also cuts down on last year's spores that might be left over, and then the spraying kills any spores that it comes in contact with so that we have nice, clean, healthy rose bushes for this year. Okay, here is the third type of rose I'd like to talk about is the climber. It has the long flexible canes and we have bent them around, in this case on a wall, in a form to form a beautiful fan shape so that when it blooms it's a fan of color across the wall. Right now we're here to talk about how we can cut it back so that next year we have a lot of little canes for the blooms to bloom upon. The first thing we do is not use the head shears as we did with the other two, but we're going to stick with the hand pruners and maybe if we have to cut out a larger cane, the loppers, but I don't think we'll have to do that today. I look at the bush just as I did before and decide which canes are going to be kept. In this case, you can see the structure on this one. It starts down here and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 main canes coming up and forming the basis of our fan. We're going to preserve those. Next we look at the secondary canes, and that is where our blooming is going to be. So we're going to start by cutting back the things that are coming out away from the wall. And before, yes, okay, I'm looking at this one. It comes way up here and it's leaning forward. It starts back here. On a climbing rose, we need to be aware that the bloom will be only on the ends that point to the sun. So if we have our rose growing straight up, we will only have blooms on the very ends and we won't have a lot of bloom. That's why we bend them sideways, so that we have the smaller stems coming up from the main canes, and that's where we get all our blooms. And the more we have of those small ones preserved along the main canes, the more blooms we have, because the roses will bloom on the tops of those. So I look at this and I see that this nice long one has starts way back down here. As a rule of thumb, we want to keep maybe 4 to 6 nodes on each stem, or if you don't want to count nodes, you can go to maybe 6 inches. From our lateral growth, we get our bloom canes, the young ones. Here, 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 here. All of these are the ones that are going to give us this year's blooms, and in fact they gave us a lot of last year's blooms too. So we don't want to cut these off, but we do want to shorten them. On this cane, we're going to count again. I don't generally count the node right next to the stem, so I'm going to start there's one right there next to the stem. I'm going to start with 1, 2, 3, 4. That one has been used. I'm going to come right out to this node. You see, we have a node here and cut there. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the bloom canes, and that would be here, here. I'm going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes. I'm counting nodes again. Here's a nice strong blooming cane. We can count up on this one. I'm going to start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and cut. On this stem, we have a node pointing in the right direction at the right distance. Isn't that nice? Out here, we don't need to cut it. It's already at the right distance. Our end goal is to have as many blooms as possible. In order to do that, we have to have as many of the bloom stems as possible. So I'm not going to cut off any more than are necessary, but I do need to get rid of, again, anything that is dead, broken, facing downward, or growing toward the wall. Here's a stem that is growing towards the wall. We don't want stems growing toward the wall. We want to see our flowers facing toward us. So I'm cutting that one off. Here we have another stem. It's growing towards the wall and down and out. I'm just going to cut this one off. We don't want stems that want to grow towards the wall and downward. I am pulling off all of these leaves, looking at the stems as I go, deciding which ones I want to keep, which ones are pointed right, which ones need to be cut where, and generally observing the bush, which becomes much more visible as I remove the leaves, which again I am pulling off rather than cutting off. I am pulling downward against the cane rather than upward, because if I pull upward then I can damage the cane. It's possible to break it in that direction. Okay, so I have taken all the leaves off this part of this climbing rose, and we can see exactly what the branching is. This stem is starting way down here and it's growing straight up. It's a nice sturdy cane. It's with good growth and healthy. Over here we have an open spot in our fan. So I think that I'm going to use this cane, going to bend it, let loose there. I'm going to bend it, I'm going to bring it around, and I'm going to tie it to the wall in this spot so that you see I have a nice distance between my flowering stems. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get another attachment like we have here, and I'm going to glue it to the wall right here, and I'm going to use this one to fill in that space. So I am not going to cut this one off at a shorter length. I'm going to let it be long and encourage it as one of my fan shapes. Over here we have another nice long stem that's healthy and growing vertically, which is of course the direction they want to go, towards the sun. But when I look over here, I don't need to fill a space in here. This is nicely paced. This stem is going to come up and bloom here, those are going to bloom here. So this space, though it looks open now, is going to fill. And out beyond there, where this would grow toward, it's nice and full already. So I don't need this one to be bent towards that direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it off right here, and I'm going to have blooms in this area from that stem. Okay, so once we're all done, once again, then we fertilize, mulch, and spray. In all cases, fertilize, mulch, and spray. So the steps for pruning roses are to get it down to size, strip it of leaves, prune off the dead and crossing and damaged stems, bring it to a good form, an open form, and preserving, in the case of the climbers, as many of the blooms stems as you can, and then clean it up. Rake, spray, mulch, and fertilize, and you're done. Sit back and wait, and you will have beautiful roses this spring. Thank you for joining me this morning. I hope I have made rose pruning easy and understandable for you, and I wish you many, many blooms this spring and summer.